All right, I want to welcome everyone to this week's meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth Chapter of SABR. I'm Chapter Chair Bruce McClure, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner-Waterman Chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, Chair. Before we get started, I'd like to make a little announcement. As you know, the chapter sends out a Monday message to start each week. Beginning June 3rd, that message will be expanding to feature great writings, research, and any other media from chapter members far and wide. We are looking for your contributions. Submit them to me through email at bruce@brucemcclurenh.com. All right, now having said that, let's get this meeting started on the right foot with our good friend, Joanne Hulbert, who has a poem for us. Joanne, how are you this evening?
I'm really fine. Now, thing is, when I saw that it was Mike Donlin, I said, oh, that's one of the ones in my files and everything. And I have about 4 pages of poems. So I will not belabor the whole 4 pages, but I picked out one, mainly this poem I picked out because it does have a Boston theme to it, and it is kind of fun. So anyway, the title of that poem is Don't Worry, Mike. It's tough in Boston, the rooter said. It's a great town, Mike, but on the dead. The American League has got the call because they've been playing better ball. Since the days of Collins, the Boston crowd has rooted long and has rooted loud for the Johnson circuit, but so I fear you'll lose out as a national manager. But Mike just smiled and shook his head. You'll have to talk to the wife, he said. You see, Mrs. Donlin, the rooter explained, over in New York where Mike was trained, the fans all know he's the swatting kid. They raised the roof when he batted or slid. It was, oh, you Mike, when he came to the bat from peanut boy to aristocrat, and I'm only afraid he will get the frown the way things are in Boston town. Quoth petite little Mabel, don't you care? My Mike would be popular anywhere. Written by William F. Kirk, one of the great deadball era early poets that was in the papers in the Boston American on August 4th, 1911. There you go.
Wow. And every time Joanne is with us and helps us out with a poem, she gives me this great big grin. I love it. Joanne, thank you so much. We appreciate you so much. So now, on to our feature presentation this evening. Mike Donlin was a brash, colorful, and complicated personality. He was the most popular athlete in New York and was a star on the powerful New York Giants teams of 1905 and 1908. Though haunted by tragedy, including the deaths of both of his parents as a boy, Donlin was charming, engaging, and kind-hearted, and also had a successful career on stage and in film. One of the early bad boys among professional athletes, Donlin's temper and combativeness, compounded by alcoholism, led to battles with umpires and fans, numerous suspensions from the game, and even jail time. In 1906, when Donlin married vaudeville actress Mabel Hite, his life changed for the better and their love story captivated the nation. Author Steve Steinberg is a baseball historian of the early 20th century with a particular focus on New York and St. Louis baseball. The book he co-authored with Lyle Spatz, 1921, The Yankees, the Giants, and the Battle for Baseball Supremacy in New York, was awarded the 2011 Seymour Medal as the best baseball book of 2010. And tonight, he is here with us to discuss his latest book, also co-authored by Lyle Spatz, Mike Donlin, A Rough and Rowdy Life from New York Baseball Idol to Stage and Screen. Steve Steinberg, welcome to Northern New England. How are you?
Thank you. Very good, and glad to have the opportunity to speak to this really active chapter and active group. I thought I would mention to Joanne that we'll get it in the slides here, and I've got some interesting photos, some of them that are in the book and some of them that are not in the book. And Mike was traded to the Boston Rustlers on August 1st, 1911. I just checked. So William F. Kirk was very timely with that poem because Donlin joined the team and they actually welcomed him. He was only in Boston for a short period of time, but you'll see one little stat that I have that shows, as bad as the team was, how much he put out and how hard he played. I've been doing baseball research and writing for about 25 years, and Lyle's been doing it for about 50 years, and neither of us have come across a more fascinating character than Mike Donlin. And also, we really didn't understand how great of a ball player he was. Lyle would say that one of the books that he's written was a biography of the relief pitcher of the Brooklyn team, Hugh Casey, who committed suicide. And of course, I spent a lot of time with Urban Shocker, who died of heart disease after his sensational 27 season with the great Yankees. But there's Donlin's story is just truly remarkable. And we really dug into it, and we needed an extra year. Usually we take about 2 years to do a book, including editing. This one, an extra year, really to get our hands deep into vaudeville, to really understand what that was all about. So I'll start with the slideshow, and we can take some Q&A. It's probably about 40 minutes. And I'm not going to read what's on the slides, because I think everybody should be able to see it. And I'll just do some chatting while you look at it. So, okay, now here we are. Can you folks see the next screen here?
Hit share screen down the bottom.
Okay, now where am I? Hold on a second.
We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please.
Okay, now were you able to see the one slide that was up?
Yes. So what I'd
Okay.
like you to do is hit share screen down the bottom.
Okay, let me see where share screen is here. Okay, hit share screen. Got it.
And now you should be able to hit your PowerPoint.
Okay.
And there we go.
And we're gonna go from the beginning. Okay. Okay. So are we good?
Perfect.
Okay. So this is the story of a guy who played ball in the early 20th century. He left the game for a number of reasons, a number of times. The picture on the top is when he made a big comeback for the 1911 New York Giants mid-season. And that was the year that McGraw didn't keep him very long, and Mike went on to Boston. And he married arguably the most famous vaudeville actress in America, certainly one of the most famous, Mabel Hite. And their marriage and their love affair really captivated the nation, and it's a remarkable story. And we'll get into that. This guy just had a story that in many ways was hard to believe. We put on the back of our book a blurb from someone that never read our book, somebody that's been dead 80 or 90 years. And the great writer Damon Runyon felt that Donlin was far more colorful than Babe Ruth. And that is saying something. And he wrote that in the 26 or 1927. And we have that on the back of our book. Our book was published by the University of Nebraska Press, like all of our other books that we've done, and my Urban Shocker book, which I did alone. And Nebraska is still offering 40% off if you go to their website using a coupon code, the number 6, the letters AS as in Albert Samuel 24, 6AS24. But anyway, on to talk about Mike. Let's find out more about him. Mike's, as Bruce said earlier, suffered an enormous amount of tragedy in his life, which might have led to his overcompensating and being a very cocky guy, at least on the outside. And his mom died in one of the most famous and spectacular train crashes in the 19th century, where she and her baby were thrown off of a high trestle bridge. She hung overnight on the wires before she dropped to her death the next day, although the baby did survive when her dress was caught on a tree limb, if that can be believed. And then Mike's father, who worked in the railroads. Many of the people in Mike's family, his parents were Irish immigrants. They gravitated to the railroads. They were all from Erie, Pennsylvania. And Mike was from Peoria. And we just think that perhaps there was something going on railroad-wise at the time when he was born. And then they went back to Erie, where he grew up. And Mike made his way out to California in the late 19th century. And baseball then was a little bit unsettled. Teams came and went, even a couple leagues merged, but he dominated both for his hitting and his pitching. He was known as a star pitcher, but he was also known for his drinking. And rarely, as you may know, in the early 20th century, did the writers publicize it, but there were some hints about the fact that he cut up, as they would say, or cut loose. Usually the code words that he violated training rules. Joe Corbett, by the way, won 20 games in the major leagues. I think the year before, his brother, of course, was the famous heavyweight boxing champion, Jim Corbett. And Joe had a salary dispute and ended up in San Francisco as a newspaper reporter. And Donlin really did have a flair for self-promotion. He believed he was going to be a star. And he went up to a reporter then and tried to convince him to put Mike's picture in the San Francisco newspaper. And Hypego went on to become a very famous cartoonist, boxing commentator and cartoonist. Interestingly enough, his nickname was Hype, not because he was a sports writer, but because he was a slender guy, very slender, pencil thin, like a hypodermic needle. That's where his name came from. So Mike made his way to St. Louis, and he joined the National League in before the American League started, which was 1901. And this quote here from a writer who went on to write for the Sporting News for 20 years is really a remarkable quote, because I could take this quote at the end of his life and look back at it, and it's really captured the essence of this guy, a very complicated man. And I think as Lyle and I have gotten into our writing, we realize that there's all kinds of shades of gray, as there is with just about everybody, and no one is all great or all perfect or all bad or all evil. So this was, and Mike broke in as a pitcher. He didn't have control very quickly. He became a position player. And in 1899, 1900, and 1900, the St. Louis team became officially the Cardinals. And Mike had a teammate by the name of John McGraw. McGraw was one of the great players in the National League and in Baltimore, but the National League downsized from 12 to 8 teams, and the Baltimore team was gone. McGraw had his roots there, and he refused to sign a contract unless the reserve clause would be kicked out, because he knew that things were about to happen with the new American League and stuff. So McGraw was not a manager. He was a teammate of Donlin's. And interestingly enough, their careers really intertwined. Donlin was really a contemporary in many ways of McGraw. He was only about 5 years younger than John McGraw. Here's a picture of the young McGraw. We normally see him on the left as a balding, portly guy. And in 1901, the American League started as a major league with Van Johnson as its president. There he is on the right. And in retrospect, many people think that it was crazy that these two guys could get along, because McGraw embodied the rowdy, ruffian style of play, and Van Johnson wanted to clean up the game. He wanted to make the umpires more respected. And this is a quote, I think, from Donald Honig about that, that it was inevitable they were going to clash. But, you know, Lyle and I really think that in many ways it made sense for them to at least to try to get together. For McGraw, here's a guy in his 20s who's now becoming the part owner and manager of a new team. And for Van Johnson, here is a new league that has taken the biggest star of the, or one of the biggest stars of the National League and brought him over to the American League. By the way, we know John McGraw as a manager and one of the greats of all time. I think people are not as aware of the fact that he was such a great ball player. And I put this stat up there because long before sabermetrics, McGraw understood that the way you win games is by scoring runs, and the way you score runs is by getting on base. And John McGraw has a career .466 on base average, which is the third all time. And I asked people maybe not to look it up, but if you want to, when we get to the Q&A, if you want to guess who are the top two in on-base average. Well, in 1901, he had a great season there. He was second in the league in batting, although as a trivia thing, it was the biggest gap between the batting champion of the league and the runner-up in baseball history. Napoleon Lajoie, I think his average was .426 that year. So it was not a close race by any means. In 1902, when Donlin was drunk one evening, he attacked an actress in Baltimore and the man that was accompanying her. And he probably didn't even know he was quite inebriated, and he ended up spending most of the 1902 season in jail. The team in Baltimore released him. McGraw really did not defend him at that time, and it looked like maybe his career would be over almost before it barely began. But he was signed by the Cincinnati team. The Cincinnati Reds gave him a chance, and he went back to the National League with Cincinnati, and he really tore the league up. He was a strong guy, a powerful guy. I thought that this picture of him in a Cincinnati Reds uniform is interesting. You can't see his whole body, but you can see that even back then in the dead ball era, he's basically gripping the bat, not at the end of the bat, better to make contact. And I'm here in Seattle, where we have one of the worst hitting major league teams in baseball. I sometimes wonder, and they strike out so much, why maybe with 2 strikes, why you don't see this at all in the game, that players maybe would choke up a little bit to put the ball in play. So Donlin went to Cincinnati, but by the middle of the 1904 season, he had worn out his welcome again. Drinking was part of the problem. Joe Kelly, who was one of McGraw's buddies in Baltimore in the 19th century, was the manager of the team. Even Kelly felt he couldn't handle him, and the Reds cut him loose. There was a lot of talk that Donlin should just be run out of baseball, but John McGraw decided to give him a chance. And McGraw had now come over, it's sort of a long story, but to the New York Giants, and he was turning that team around. And in 1904, he brought Donlin to New York, and Mike Donlin and New York were basically made for each other. This was a guy that loved the neon lights, that loves his celebrity status, and he quickly became a celebrity, and he truly was the center of the stage. Just as an aside, this is his teammate Christy Mathewson was at his peak. Certainly as we get into 1905 and the great 1908 season, Mathewson was far, far less popular than Donlin. And we explore in the book a little bit about the evanescence of fame and celebrity and why that is. But Donlin, when he left the ballpark, he loved the fans, and Mathewson was much more of a aloof kind of character who has since become idolized, in part because of his tragic death. But there he goes, and Donlin joins the New York team. And in 1904, he plays very well. In 1905, they win. They win the pennant again, and they play a World Series. There was no World Series in 1904, and Donlin is the leading hitter during that World Series when Mathewson won 3 games. 1906, Mike Donlin, before the season start, is riding a train going to play indoor baseball, which was an event and a sport that I don't know a whole bunch about. And he was going to upstate New York, and he pulled a gun on the porter on the train. I think there was a jewelry salesman who was riding there who always had a gun. Donlin got the gun from him. And here again, trouble again. Lyle and I were unable to find any record of the case of it coming to trial. And Mike Donlin is certainly in his early career is really a guy that got, as a lot of maybe stars get, another chance. And the case probably never came to court. But here's a quote from Sporting News that's calling him a degenerate because of his rabble rousing, his drinking, in this case with a gun. But he did continue. And in the 1906 season, he started out, and on May 15th of 1906, he was hitting .339. He was second in the league in batting. The team was tied with the Cubs, and Mike had an accident sliding into a base where he fractured his ankle, and basically he was done for the 1906 season. So here we are. He's lost most of 1902. He's losing most of 1906. And when we get all done with Mike's career, we'll find that he played over 1,000 games, but he probably played the equivalent of about 8.5 seasons. He did come back for a few pinch hitting performances, but his batting average sunk quite a bit. And that year, of course, the Giants faded badly. The Cubs caught fire. That was their great year, and the Giants finished 20 games back. And 1906. Just before the 1906 season started, Mike marries Mabel Hite. And it's a fascinating love affair, and it is a very genuine love affair. We can surmise that perhaps she thought she must have known about his alcoholism, and he had so much instability in his life that it became very, very special uh, uh, for um, for both of them. And there's no YouTube or videotape remaining of Mabel. She was a remarkable performer. My sense is that if you were trying to describe her, you would say she was part Lucille Ball, part Carol Burnett, with maybe a little Phyllis Diller sprinkled in there. And she captivated her audiences, and she just was goofy and at times grotesque. She did not use any really sexual innuendo in any of her actions, but she was a headliner. And in the 1907 season, Mike was ready to come back to the Giants, and he stayed with Mabel. And this is before he went on the stage. And actually, at the SABR National Convention, I'm going to be giving a presentation on what they did in 1907. I'll give you a few hints of it. And it really shows that his love for this woman, that he did not want to be away from her, because he wasn't making big bucks on Broadway. She was starring in Chicago. He was getting $50, I can't remember, the week or a month, as an assistant manager there, but he also played some semi-pro ball. And in 1907, when Mike and Mabel were in Chicago, this was not New York. This was the capital of the baseball world. Remember, who was in the 1906 World Series? The White Sox and the Cubs. And in 1907, throughout the Midwest at this time, sandlot ball, semi-pro ball was incredibly vibrant. Some of you may have seen a picture of Brookfield Park in Cleveland, where over 100,000 fans turned out for a game during the teens to watch a semi-pro game. And there's a quote from Hugh Fullerton, the great sports writer, said, if you really want to see baseball in Chicago, don't go to watch the Cubs or the White Sox. Go to the lots. Go to the sand lots. And what was interesting was, with the semi-pro ball, Mike ended up playing for a team called the Logan Squares, arguably the best semi-pro sandlot team in baseball history. It was managed and owned by Jimmy Callahan, who was the star player and later manager in Chicago. He left the White Sox. He would later return to them. And the amazing thing is, in Chicago, there were not integrated teams, but there was integrated ball. And Mike Donlin organized that summer a team of all-stars to play against the great Rube Foster's Leland Giants. And Mike recognized how good Foster was. And when Foster died more than 2 decades later, you can see what Donlin said about him. And Foster was the star there. The really fascinating thing was, when I did this presentation to the New York Giants Preservation Society, Larry Hogan was listening, and Larry's, for decades, has been researching black baseball, and was pretty stunned to realize that that Cap Anson of Chicago, who's usually attributed for contributing to the barring of blacks for many, many decades in baseball, that Cap Anson's team was playing against Rube Foster's team. And here is a box score. Anson had some financial problems at the time. The ballparks would be packed, and there was not segregated seating. It was an incredible scene to watch, as described here. And we get into it a bit in our book. So that's the season that I'm going to talk about at the SABR convention. Although I only have 20 minutes, the SABR presentations are pretty tight time-wise. So that was Mike's 1907. In 1908, Mike returns to Major League Baseball. He returns to the Giants, and this is the year of arguably the greatest pennant race in baseball history, the Merkle game. And the teams, in this case, there were 3 teams that actually could have ended up tied at the end of the season. And I did a paper on this at, I think, the Pittsburgh National Convention. The Pirates could have ended up in a 3-way tie. They had already disbanded. That's a whole wild story. But it ended up being a 2-way tie, and there was a game to make up the Merkle game. And the New York Giants hosted it at the Polo Grounds and lost. And you see here, Mike Donlin's had a terrific year, but once again, he faded a little bit. And Honus Wagner I haven't studied him year by year, tended to really heat up on a couple of these seasons later in the year. In 1906, when Donlin broke his ankle, Wagner was only hitting 277, and he won the batting title. And Wagner really would have been someone to behold. I think we all think and wonder if we could go back in time to see a game, you know, what it would be, what year it would be, what team it would be. But to see Wagner out in the field, I can imagine him as a powerful hitter, but he was an amazing fielder. And this was the New York newspaper. One of the New York papers had a popularity contest that season in 1908, and for the most popular player in New York, Donlin got almost 500,000 votes. Christy Mathewson, who won 36 or 37 games that year, did not even get 100,000 votes. And again, we touch upon that. And one of the really interesting things about Donlin, which shows how what a complicated guy he was incredibly competitive. You know, I've read some articles that say the two most competitive, fiercely combative ball players in the dead ball era were Mike Donlin and Johnny Evers. And after this heartbreaking game when the Cubs beat the Giants, Mike Donlin went up to Hugh Fullerton, the reporter, after the game and told him something and said, "You cannot repeat this to anybody, but I'm glad we lost." And Fullerton sat on this story for more than a decade. I'm not going to reveal the punchline to you. You'll have to get the book to find out why. But Fullerton said it revealed so much of the decency of this man and why Donlin was actually happy that the Chicago Cubs won that game in 1908. After the 1908 season, Mike Donlin joined his wife on Broadway at Hammerstein's Theater. Some of us older people know the name Oscar Hammerstein. There was an Oscar Hammerstein the first, the one that's more famous from the 1950s.
Uh-oh. He froze up.
No.
Oh. Let's see what happens here in the next minute or two. Oh dear. We are experiencing technical difficulties. Steve has frozen in time.
Is there any way to get in touch with them?
Oh dear. I'll give him a second here.
If you were to boot him out, if you were,
And he left. So his connection froze up. Something happened there. Let's see if he comes back in here just in the next minute or two. That's too bad. All right, who can sing? Can anybody sing? Tap dance?
I still have several pages of poems.
You know what? I might be going to you in just a minute, Joanne. I'll tell you what.
All right, I'm standing
While
by.
I got a second, I want to let everybody know about the new podcast I've debuted with fellow SABR member Evan Katz. Baseball's Last Frontier, Stories from the Pecos League, will follow Evan's journey on baseball's entry level as pitching coach of the Roswell Invaders of the Pecos League each week this summer. That's available now wherever you get your podcast. So if you have a chance to check it out, please do. It's a lot of fun. He's got some great stories of what goes on down there, and I can only imagine how much fun that's going to get as we progress through the summer. So as we sit here, this isn't good.
I can tell you something about that league. I lived in Santa Fe, and they had a team in that league for a while. It was not that fun to go to. The seats were just sort of rows of concrete, but the city park. But there was a book written about that team because they were the worst. It was called The Worst Team in the Worst League. They finished last. It was a little booklet of a book.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, that's good.
All right, Joanne, you may as well hit us with another poem while I see if I can get.
All right, well, we do a song and dance. Yes, that's right. Okay, all right. This is a Grantland Rice poem, so this is kind of more, highfalutin and really up there. Mike Donlin's soliloquy. Say that I'm all in forever. Say that I'm slowing and through. Say that I'm no longer clever out where the hog trains do. Show them where time is beguiling, a whip that is all in the flinch. Then show 'em a picture that's smiling when I come to bat in a pinch. I know the old boy's getting seedy. I know when a leg's in the smear. I know when a hoof isn't speedy. And out where the finish is near, each dog has his day in the spinning of glory that youth makes a cinch. But show me a picture that's grinning when Michael strolls up in a pinch. And that's Grantland Rice for you.
So I'm on the phone right now with Steve. His computer just quit on him, and he's going to try to get.
Jeez, oh no!
Da, 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 da.
Rude.
I think this is SABR marketing. We have to go to the convention to hear the rest of this.
There you go. Yes, stay tuned.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, this might be a good time to tell my Turkey Mike Donlin story. So,
Beautiful. Go for it.
yeah, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but it's close as I'll ever get to Turkey Mike Donlin. So about 30 years ago, I was a graduate student finishing up my program, and I was a baseball nut back then, but there was no web or anything like that. But one of my good friends, as a graduation present, he gave me the Baseball Almanac. It's that huge book of statistics on every ball player that ever made the major leagues. And I had heard of Turkey Mike Donlin because I think I'd read a book about the 1908 race or whatever, and that name just kind of sticks with you, but I couldn't really remember it. Anyway, I'm sitting in my office. I got my Baseball Almanac there, and this mathematics postdoc comes walking by, Jimmy Donlin. And I know the connection, of course. And then Jimmy sees the book on my desk, and he says, wow. He says, you know, I had a great uncle who was a Major League Baseball player. And I was like, I made a connection. I said, was your great uncle Turkey Mike Donlin? And he was like, how did you know that? But I was like,
Because I'm Sean Moore and I know stuff.
exactly. This close to Turkey Mike.
We're trying to get Steve back in here. Apparently his computer just quit on him. He's pulled out the emergency laptop to rejoin us. Hopefully he's going to be able to get back in. And we'll continue the presentation. If not, then I guess what we'll do is we'll have him in again.
Connecting right now.
Let's see here. Oh, hey, look who's here.
He's on mute.
All right, Steve could be back here, folks.
Okay, I'm back.
There he is.
Okay. Okay, this was not a planned dramatic exit. And I'm going to have to get our slideshow going.
We had some speculation that this was marketing from the very tip top of SABR, that in order to find out the rest of the story, they had to go to the convention and see you present.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm back. Can you hear? Can you see the slide? Okay.
No, you're gonna have to go down the bottom and hit share screen again.
Okay. I'm gonna have to do that.
Yeah. You are a co-host, so you can do that.
Okay. Okay.
There we go.
And I want to do the slideshow and from the current slide. So do we have that, or?
I can see it here. You'll have to enlarge that.
Well, let me see here. Let me just again.
There we go.
Okay. So now we're seeing the full slides, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Apologize for that brief break there. So Mike opened on Broadway at Hammerstein's Theater. Oscar Hammerstein the first built these really beautiful theaters. I think even there might have been one in Boston, but certainly in New York, and he wanted them to be opera houses, but they didn't make much money. Not a lot of people went up for opera. His son Willie was the incredible flair for promotion, and Willie turned them into vaudeville houses. And his son Willie died rather young during the mid-teens, but they were just famous for having everybody, like if somebody was a famous murderer, the person would walk out on the stage. There was a 9-foot Russian man one day that showed up, and I don't know if it's an apocryphal story or not, but once someone approached Willie and said, "If you pay me $1,000, I will commit suicide on the stage." And supposedly Hammerstein paused for a second, and then his retort was, "Well, what would you do for an encore?" So that was the end of that. But basically, Mike and Mabel had this skit. They went on Broadway. Mabel taught him a lot of the ropes, and basically, it was a little bit of a baseball sketch where she's at home, and Mike is thrown out of the game by an umpire for arguing, and they were playing the Pirates, and Honus Wagner got a bunch of hits, and Mike didn't get any, and she's very angry at him. And finally, they make up, and at the end, they blew the audience away because they had this dance routine. And the very interesting thing is, this was 2 decades before talking movies, and yet when Mike was making a movie in the late 1920s, one of the film people remembered that as a kid, he would go watch this movie like virtually every day. And what would happen is that Mike and Mabel had their routine filmed, and then it was recorded on a record, and they would basically time it such and synchronize it. And so ironically, they had a movie that had sound long before sound movies were out. Will Rogers weaves in and out of our book. And Will Rogers has said that in all of his 30 years of show business, he never remembers the roar of a crowd as when Mike and Mabel, when the curtain went up, and after the end of their little skit, when the curtain went down for repeated encores. In those days, if you know anything about vaudeville, it was a lot of different shows during the night, and they had about a 15 to 20-minute show, and they had to urge the crowd to stop cheering to let the other shows go on. And they went on really to pack them in on Broadway. Then they took their show on the road. And during the 1909 and 1910 season, the headline virtually all the time was about Donlin. Will he or won't he play for the Giants? He was one of the highest paid athletes in the game in 1908, making $6,000 a year. Mathewson made more, and Honus Wagner made more. And it's hard to believe, but Mike and Mabel, they went on the stage and they were pulling down $2,000 a week. That's in 1908. And Mabel, as goofy a character as she was, her persona on stage, she really had the head of a businesswoman. And a lot of times they were always together. Reporters would talk to them, and Mike would sort of be wavering, "Oh, I want to come back to the Giants," and she would step in and take over the conversation. But he wanted to be with her. And the reason why I find 1907 so interesting, in 1909 and 1910, you can say, well, he didn't play baseball because of the money. But in 1907, he's making $50. I mean, he was making some money playing for the Logan Squares, but he was there because he loved this woman very, very much. Mabel had some other shows in the next couple of years. Mike had some parts in them. She was a bit of a women's liberation person. She had a very famous song that went through multiple printings of the sheet music. "I'm on my way to Reno to get a divorce," and singing about the battle cry of freedom. She was a very fashionable person, as was he. And she was written up in, I think it was Leslie's Weekly. There were other articles about women driving cars. And here they are in a very flashy car. And again, some of these photos are in the book. I think the one on the right is the one or the two of them together standing is not in the book. In 1911, Mike did return to baseball, and his relationship with John McGraw, the manager of the Giants, was very complicated. McGraw loved him. They egged each other on in fighting against umpires. They both were heavy drinkers. But McGraw probably resented the fact that Donlin left him for 3 years, 1907, 9, and 10, left the Giants. Mike came back in the middle of the season, but he very quickly was traded to Boston. And this is the statistic I mentioned earlier, that here he is at age 33 with a last place team. And I think they finished 54 games out of first place. And Mike, in over 100 at-bats, hit over 400 for the team. Mike did not stay in Boston very long, mainly because John Montgomery Ward, who was a very strong character, took over as running the Boston club, and he and Mike almost inevitably were going to clash, and they did clash. And Mike went on to Pittsburgh, and in 1912, and he had again late in his career had a solid season, and of course he was trying to show McGraw that he could still hit, and he did very well there against the Giants. In June of 1912, Mabel is appearing in Harlem on stage and she collapses. She's 29 years old. The initial thought is that she had maybe appendicitis. The doctors opened her up. And it was very rare that in those days, I very rarely see the C word for cancer, but I did hear exactly what kind of cancer it was, whether it was the intestine or the stomach it's a little bit unclear. But it was obviously a very devastating blow, and to Mike, and he was very low. He took a lot of time off. The Pirates gave him time off to be at her side. And late in the 1912 season, the Pirates came to the Polo Grounds, and John Brush, the owner of the Giants, who was dying himself, I think he would die that winter, would watch the games from his car, I think from right field. Maybe there were no stands there in right field. And Mabel and her mother showed up. And of course, the reporters went there. This is a picture from a newspaper. The actual photograph, wire photos, does not survive. And there was a lot of promise and excitement. Man, she looks pretty good. Maybe she's recovering here. And the doctors had given up on her. And she did make this appearance in September, but it was not to be. And a month later, this incredibly talented woman was dead. And this is a quote from a theater critic who I think was based in Chicago. And it was sort of interesting to have female theater critics back then, but Amy Leslie shows up quite often, and that may even be a pseudonym for the reporter's name. And Mabel was, one can only wonder, and it's a very sad story. You know, she died before silent movies really skyrocketed. She would have been in her mid-40s when talking movies came out. And so one wonders how famous and how great she would be. So very few people have heard of Mike Donlin, but even fewer have heard of Mabel Hite. And Mike had to go on. And once again, he was cut adrift, the anchor of his life. And here again, Will Rogers remembers when Mike and Mabel were so famous, and Will and his wife were nobodies, that they invited Will Rogers and his wife up to their apartment and had them for dinner. And Mabel showed his wife her clothes. Will says there were $2,000 furs. That's 1907, 1908 prices. And the kindness that Donlin and Hite showed to him, he never forgot it and wrote about it 25 years later. Well, Mike had to go on, and he picked up his life, and he went back on Broadway, and he appeared with some pretty well-known actors, and he went on the world tour. John McGraw and Charles Comiskey took their White Sox and Giants, and McGraw took Donlin with him, perhaps, feeling sorry for him, perhaps wanted to have a drinking buddy on the trip around the world. They played everywhere from, the Orient, they went to Ceylon, all over to playing before the King of England, and McGraw then signed him for 1914. Mike remarried a girl from a very famous acting family, Rita Ross. She acted in bit parts. There's no surviving film of her. And this is from a newspaper. And we got our publisher to agree to show the photograph so we could see the picture. As Will Rogers says, a beautiful young girl. And I've always felt, I have a lot of connections in the photo world. And I always feel that if a photo is really, really rare or hard to come by, then, maybe you don't, it may not be the highest quality one, but it's unique to be able to show it. And Mike went on in 1915 to star in a movie. And it was really the first feature movie of a ball player. And it was the typical kind of story where he wanted the girl, and the girl's father said, oh, he's only a ball player. And at the end, though, he does win the girl because he is kidnapped by gamblers who want to fix the championship game. Now, this is interesting because this is 1915, 4 years before the Black Sox scandal. And even though Major League Baseball, organized baseball, was saying, you can't fix a baseball game. And here was a screenwriter writing this in the part. Mike escapes, and of course, he gets to the ballpark in the ninth inning, score the winning run, and he's signed on the spot, his semi-pro team, by a giant scout played by none other than John McGraw. And Donlin was a pretty decent actor. He wasn't a great one, but I think Mabel had taught him a lot of things, and he became well respected both on Broadway, and then he went on to Hollywood. He moved in the early 1920s. He and Rita moved to Hollywood, and as Will Rogers said, this was a guy that everybody loved, that everybody, directors, and he appeared in films with famous directors like John Ford, and they found a part for him. And if you go to the IMDb website, you'll see that Mike's credited about 50 films. He probably appeared in about 100 of them, in most of them very, very small parts. His two drinking buddies, and he did start drinking again, although he never had any big outbursts that were reported, but he wasn't as famous anymore, were John Barrymore, the legendary actor alcoholic. And we were surprised to find that Buster Keaton was quite an alcoholic at that time. Barrymore put him in the movie The Sea Beast, which was sort of a takeoff on Moby Dick, although they changed a little bit. There's a love story in there where Barrymore falls in love with a girl who I think became his second wife or third wife. And Donlin had a small role in The General. Sea Beast was a huge commercial success. It has been forgotten now. The General was a horrible commercial, it bombed, but now is considered one of the greatest movies of all time by the American Film Institute. And it basically bombed because it was a comedy about the Civil War, and many people felt Civil War wasn't anything to make fun of. The General was actually this train. And Buster Keaton was a fanatic baseball fan. He always insisted on a baseball diamond being nearby when he was shooting, that if they reached a rough spot during shooting, they would take a break and they would play nine. Here's a pretty cool picture of Mike that didn't make it in the book when in the early 1920s, but by 1927, he was very sick. And there are conflicting reports, whether it was cancer, whether it was heart. It probably was his heart. He wanted to go to the Mayo Brothers Clinic, which was what Mayo Clinic was called then, and he didn't have the money to do so. So a big benefit was organized, and Barrymore headlined it and actually did his Hamlet soliloquy, which he had performed, I think, in London in 1922, like the greatest Hamlet of all time. And a lot of people rallied for Mike. He went there, and here's the ad from the newspaper. George Jessel was the MC. There were many performers there, and Mike bounced back, and Mike went on to appear in many, many movies. These are two pictures here that give you an idea of the change in
Steve, somehow you went on mute.
I'm sorry. You hear me okay?
Now I can.
Yeah. So on the left side, Mike looks very different than he does on the right. And the right, you've got a guy who's probably 50 years old who looks like he's 70. And he definitely did have a hard life. And then just sort of continuing on, Mike appeared in many, many films, and many of them he was the bad guy. And he also became a respected baseball consultant. When a movie was made and they wanted to make sure that the baseball fans would know that it's realistic, Mike Donlin was, even if he didn't appear in the movie, he was the consultant to make sure that everything looked right. He still stayed connected to the game of baseball here, donning a beard with a couple other well-known ball players of his time, and watching spring training with John McGraw with the Giants probably in the late 1920s. in 1930, Mike went back on Broadway, and Ed Sullivan, who some of us know as the famous TV variety show host, was a gossip and social life reporter. He had a big column about Mike in a show where Mike played in a drama, did a tremendous bit of acting, and Sullivan had some really interesting comments about it, recognizing that. So Mike Donlin did not live a long life. He outlived, obviously, Mabel by 20 years, more than 20 years. But he had a wrap party after finishing a Hollywood film with Ed Wynn, the comic actor, and went home at night and never woke up. Probably a heart attack. And here again, Damon Runyon. See a few quotes about him. And here's a picture of Mike with the Spanky and our gang crew, which I love. And he was it was a remarkable life. Again, he died in his early to mid 50s. I want to go back and circle back on how good of a ball player he was. Mike only played 80 or more games in 5 seasons, but as you can see, whether it's batting average or the new SABR metrics, this guy was one of the best. He finished very highly ranked, and even in the couple seasons that he didn't quite appear in 80 games, again, his numbers were really, really high. Career .333 batting average, one of the highest in the history of the game. Had he stayed in the game and focused just on the game, one can say he probably would be in the Hall of Fame. But he succeeded in 2 realms of entertainment. And so that really concludes my little presentation. This is one reporter describing what it was like to watch Donlin walk up to the plate. And there's that code if you want to order the book from Nebraska, University of Nebraska Press. And like I said, it's the most fascinating guy that we've ever written about. And I appreciate the time to share it and maybe bring Mike Donlin, who's been virtually totally forgotten. And Bruce, I think we want to do any questions, and
we absolutely want to take some questions from the crowd. Go down to the bottom of the screen. You'll see the word reactions down there. If you click that button, another button will come up that says raise hand. If you do that, you can get in line to speak with our presenter tonight, Steve Steinberg. This has been a great presentation so far, even with the little technical difficulty we have, but that was okay. Let's go to our first hand up. Molly, my wife, you're up. Go.
First of all, Steve, thank you for coming and sharing with us tonight. And thank you for having patience to deal with the technological issues.
oh,
I would just like to know what inspired you to do this research. Like, what drew you to Donlin?
Well, Lyle and I are always intrigued by people that have been forgotten or overlooked. Certainly, Urban Shocker fits the bill. We wrote a dual biography of Miller Huggins and Jacob Rupert, the Yankee manager and owner, who are constantly mentioned in the Yankees books, but really never had a story of their own. And I think we were just, it's a pretty captivating story. We were surprised at really how good a ball player he really was, and how immensely popular he was. And his life is just so fascinating. He became, whenever we do research, you stumble upon other people or other things, and you say, oh, maybe I'm going to do something about that, a year or 2 down the line. And sometimes it doesn't really lead to a meaningful story. Lyle and I are kicking around something right now, and it may or may not turn into a worthy book. Sometimes it may be just an article. But gosh, this guy deserves to have his story told. And, if there wasn't a real Mike Donlin and you walked into someone, they would assume you've got a fiction story. And I cannot tell you how many times people have told me who are interviewing me saying, this should be made into a movie. Whether it will, I don't know, but quite a life.
That would be kind of interesting.
Thank you again. And it truly was really interesting.
Thank you.
Sean Moore, you're up. Sean, how you doing?
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Steve. This is just a fantastic presentation. Fascinating. So while we were experiencing technical difficulties, I related to everybody about the time that I met Turkey Mike's grandnephew, Jimmy Donlin. about 30 years ago. But
Wow. Wow. Okay.
yeah, probably his great nephew. But anyway, so Jimmy Donlin told me that Turkey Mike hated the name Turkey Mike. That was part of their family lore. Do you have any comment about that?
That could very well be. You know, we really didn't come across that. I'm still sort of fascinated by the story of a descendant, because Mike and Mabel, as far as I know, and Mike and Rita, as far as I know, did not have any children. Mike and Mabel in 1912 were really very crestfallen. They tried to adopt a couple children from the Titanic, and for whatever reason, maybe because of the committee, whoever decides, felt, you know, they're on the road all the time. But that's really interesting. But, you know, he was called Turkey Mike because he had this strut like a turkey, very cocky kind of guy with his, you know, with his head up, and yeah, I don't know that, but that's interesting, and it could very well be true. Just like John McGraw hated the nickname Muggsy, so but that is really interesting. So,
Okay, thank you.
and I would love to hear from. I would love to hear more about this relative. Is the person still alive, or you don't have any idea?
Oh, I'm sure he's still alive. He's probably in his 60s. Now I lost touch with him 30 years ago, but so just to be clear, he said Turkey Mike Donlin was his great uncle. So
Okay.
Turkey Mike had a brother.
Yeah. Okay.
That's where he
And
lived.
Mike had many brothers and sisters. Many of them died young, and yeah, I'm also looking here. I've got a little video clip. It wasn't on my laptop. I'm trying to bring it up, where Mike is a bartender in a movie, and maybe we'll make a stab at that if we have time at the end. But thank you for that.
We'll see if we can get that clip in. Francis Kinlaw, how you doing?
Pretty
Hey, Francis.
well.
Hi.
You are up.
Yeah, Steve, I first of all should apologize. My family was rude enough to call me 3 or 4 times during your presentation, but I caught as much as I could. I'll read the book, and also I hope to catch you on one of your other. I notice you've had several presentations on Zoom. My question is that I know due to his short career, perhaps the case could not be built, a strong case might not be built for his inclusion in the Hall of Fame. But do you know of, but there are some other people whose cases may not be too strong either. Do you know of any advocates that he's had either in his time or when the beginning of the Hall of Fame, or to this day, who feel he should be in the Hall of Fame?
I don't know of any advocates. And, you know, when I started my baseball research quarter century ago, like with Urban Shocker, that was one of my passions. I think at this point, as a writer and researcher, I think my job, what's more important is just to bring their stories out. And I'm not as concerned about that. But I don't think there's been any real movement in that direction. I mean, he did play over 1,000 games, which is not insignificant. So.
Yeah.
But good question.
Thank you.
Dixie Tarango, you're up. How you doing, Dixie?
I'm doing fine. Steve, great presentation.
Thank
I was
you.
particularly taken by the pictures, the photographs that you had. Some of them look unbelievably great.
Yeah.
Did you have much trouble
Yeah.
finding them?
Yeah, I'm sort of funny that way, because I always feel, if you've looked at my other books, that the photographs are really as important as the content of the books. And I think that the time to start looking and working on photographs is when you start working on the book, rather than, and I don't mean, the Hall of Fame is incredible with their collection of photos, but I want my content of a book that I do, or that Lyle and I do, and the photos that we do, that people would say, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I never saw that before. And there happens to be, the New York Public Library has a branch, the Performing Arts branch, at what's now, I guess, been renamed the David Geffen Theater. And there were some photographs there that were pretty wonderful, and I use them in the presentation, some in the book. They look great on the PowerPoints, but actually I've downgraded them so they can't just be lifted off, and then they end up being sold on eBay or whatever. So, but yeah, that last one of Mabel that showed her years of her life is a beautiful photograph. She was a lovely woman, as goofy as she appeared on stage. But yeah, I think photographs, and I network with a lot of collectors who really have wonderful photographs that just sit in a vault somewhere, and they're so proud. I mean, the one guy, Michael Mumby out of Michigan, he's never had a picture of his own on the front page, on the front of a book, and he was pretty thrilled about that. And I'm thrilled also to be able to use them and give them credit.
I have one piece of very trivial information for you.
Okay.
Earlier today, like 2 o'clock in the morning today,
Okay.
I was looking up Donlin just so I would know something about him for your presentation.
Right.
And I looked at the bottom of his career on the retro sheet stats and saw that he had been tossed out of several games. He was ejected from several games.
Yeah.
And there was one there that had no reason with it for him being thrown out. So I decided to look the game up, and I did. It was May the 5th of 1908, one of his more spectacular years.
Okay.
Anyway, so I looked up the game, and it was in New York against Philadelphia, and New York won 4-0. But the ejection never happened.
Wow.
The 3 New York papers, the Sun, the Times, and the Tribune, and the Philadelphia Inquirer all wrote about the game in length. And Mike Donlin got hit twice by pitches by this guy Faxon, who was pitching in his very first game in the major leagues as a relief pitcher. And he hit him a second time, and everyone thought there was going to be a fight. So everyone gathers, and I guess Red Doohan of the Phillies was there, and I guess he was a pretty tough guy. So McGraw, Doohan, Donlin, and the 2 umpires, Emsley and Riglet, whatever his name was, they all gathered up, and the umpires stopped the action. So there was no fight. There wasn't anything. And all 4 papers said that in the long stories they read. So they weren't thrown out because they had to finish the game. Because in the box scores, there are no other names there indicating that they were thrown out. So it never happened.
That the ejections on retro sheet is a work in progress, and it keeps on being added to by some wonderful SABR volunteers. I thought you were going to tell me about another one. There was actually one game that Donlin was thrown out for arguing balls and strikes. Now, the thing that made it so unusual is he got called for ball 4, and he got thrown out of the game because I think he was competitive with Wagner, and he wanted to get a hit. Yeah. And batting average was more important than on base average back then. And he was tossed for arguing. He said that should have been strike 2, not ball 4. Yeah, he and McGraw, they did egg each other on, I think, and they fed each other's tempers. But Donlin, I think, like McGraw, once the ball game was over, I mean, Donlin would go out to dinner and pick up the tab and whatever. So he left it at the ballpark. Interesting. Anyone?
I just put Bill Foxen's stats from Baseball Reference into the chat in 1908. He was 7-7 with an ERA of 1.95. He pitched 22 games, started 16 of them. Was a 16-20 pitcher throughout his career. He only played 8, 9, 10, and 11.
Oh, wow.
Interesting. Dewey, unmute. You are up. Here we go.
Yeah, I was wondering if he was ever courted by other New York ball clubs like the Highlanders or the Dodgers. Was there a reserve clause when that would have been in effect even after he left the Giants?
The reserve clause was definitely in effect. What McGraw did in 1900 was almost unheard of. I mean, he was such a great player, but he basically said, I'm not going to play unless I can just get a 1-year contract. So Donlin was a member of the Giants, but you know, many of those times, I mean, after getting out of jail, after pulling the gun on the train, he was lucky to find a team that would take him, because most of baseball just didn't want to have anything to do with him. So, and it's also interesting that, you know, when he was in New York around the time that Hal Chase, who some of you know is arguably the most corrupt player in the history of the game, that Donlin and Chase, there's very little information about it, but I think they would hang out at McGraw's pool hall that was co-owned or part owned by Arnold Rothstein, the famous gambler. So, you know, this goes back at the beginning of Chase's career.
Do you have that clip of Donlin tending bar?
You know, I'm looking for it now because I didn't have it teed up on my laptop. And what I can do is I can send it to you, and you can maybe put it out.
Sure.
You know, when you, I'll do that. I don't want to take more time here. I didn't have it teed up on my laptop, unfortunately, and I still don't know what's going on with the other computer. But
well, that was weird. But we got you back in. We got through it. It was a good night for everybody. This was a great presentation. And we got through it with the technical difficulties. That's okay. We got through it. It was a good presentation. We enjoyed every second of it. Now, next week, June 3rd, we're going to have Steve Rennie here with us. Steve is fresh off his appearance at the Frederick Ivor Campbell 19th Century Baseball Conference this past February. And he will be giving his well-received presentation entitled Forgotten Gems, Ottawa's Early Baseball History. That's Monday, June 3rd at 7 p.m. Now, I want to thank everybody for coming this evening. And I want to thank everybody who is watching this after the fact at home on YouTube for joining us. And if you like what we're doing up here in Northern New England, please subscribe to our channel to get alerts for each of our weekly uploads. And if you are a baseball fan, you need to join SABR, the premier baseball community. Offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom, SABR boasts more than 35 different research committees, over 70 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to sabr.org/join today. Well, I think this has been a really great presentation, and I certainly do appreciate Steve for doing it. And I'll put a link to the code for the book in this video's description on YouTube when it goes up tomorrow. Steve, thanks a lot for persevering with us tonight.
Okay, sounds good. Take care. Thank you, everybody.
And we will see everybody next week. Have a good night. Let's get everybody out of here. We'll see you then. Thank you.